This episode was made possible by Expressvpn. Start browsing the web securely with 3 months free by going to expressvpn.com/MMI. On this episode of Meet My Inspiration, I'm speaking with Adam Carolla. Adam is a comedian, radio personality, television host, actor, podcaster, and director. He hosts The Adam Carolla Show, a podcast which has set the world record as the most downloaded podcast. He co-hosted Loveline on radio and MTV, The Man Show on Comedy Central, and has written and directed several feature films and documentaries as well. He's done a lot from reality shows to home improvement shows and even written several New York Times best-selling books, all while making us laugh and guiding people towards bettering themselves in every way. And now, please welcome Adam Carolla. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Minion, and this is Meet My Inspiration. My guest today is Adam Carolla. Ace Man, let's get it on.
Let's do it.
All right. Adam, we're lucky to live in an age where top quality television, movies, and all kinds of excellent entertainment options are at our fingertips 24 hours a day. But what is it that you tend to spend your evenings watching mostly lately?
I watch a very wide variety of shows. I watch weird 70s and 80s shows like The Love Boat and TJ Hooker, just to kind of examine where we were at that time with music and hairstyles and choice of language and sort of societal mores and things like that. And then I'll watch Tucker Carlson. I'll watch anything UFC. I'll watch football. I'll watch some CNN in the morning just to figure out what they're saying about COVID this day. And yeah, that's it. Not a lot of series and things like that. Of course, Jimmy Kimmel Live. You got to support Jimmy.
Why not? It's the stuff like Love Boat and TJ Hooker that I'm kind of curious about, because those are not good shows, Adam, in my opinion, at least. What is it that's so compelling for you to spend so much time watching those old shows?
First, I'm looking at it as I'm seeing it through the eyes of myself when I was 12 and I was babysitting my neighbor and I was watching those shows. So I'm watching it, trying to sort of think how was a 12-year-old version of me processing this?
Uh-huh.
How was it influencing me? How was it giving me thoughts about, on like The Love Boat, it's like thoughts about sexuality, thoughts about women, thoughts about relationships, TJ Hooker, kind of the same thing, just sort of where we were at, when we were there. And some of this stuff, I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. So some of the stuff like TJ Hooker, it's all filmed around the San Fernando Valley and Hollywood. So I can sort of see the old billboards and the old buses with the KLOS signs on them and old radio stations and stuff. And some of it's just a weird kind of nostalgic version
Kind of a time capsule or something, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of a time capsule.
All right.
But with an eye, sort of an eye toward like evolution, like where were we? What are we now? And then what are we going to be looking at now that we're going to be thinking about, like you were thinking about watching TJ Hooker. Now you make fun of it, the hairstyles, so many different facets of it, or The Love Boat. What is that now that we can try to see if we can examine in real time without having to go 20 or 30 years and look back on it?
Sure. Okay. Adam, you're a podcaster, author, documentary and feature filmmaker, race car driver, former boxer, television and radio personality. You do and have done quite a lot in your life. You're a very motivated and inspired guy, but I would say that you grew up in a very uninspiring environment. How would you describe your upbringing?
Sort of bleak and kind of devoid of inspiration, not a lot of voices, not a lot of discussions, not a lot of plans, just a kind of a grow up and shut up without a lot of discussions on possibilities or potential or my potential or human potential. just to kind of get along, get a job, get out of the house. Life's a bitch, then you die. It was just sort of how I grew up, but with not a stereotypical sort of dad who was blowing cigarette smoke in my face and telling me life is a bitch and women were all trying to get your money. Just not a lot of conversation in general.
Yeah. You like you said, it was a pretty bleak environment. You didn't really have anybody in your life. Your friends, your family, like you said, no plans, no discussions, almost no communication, really. Um, but there must have been something in your childhood that gave you hope or inspiration, not in a corny or sappy way. I mean, that kind of showed you that there was more possibilities in life than that bleak environment that you were in. Was there somebody or something that kind of gave you hope or showed you something more was possible?
My step grandfather sort of half raised me, was a writer in Hollywood way back when. And so I guess I kind of knew from him that it was possible to work in some capacity that didn't involve moving things or roofing or very blue collar. I had very blue collar aspirations, but they weren't really aspirations. I just thought, you're a bad student. So if you're a bad student, well, what do? You get a job, you know, stocking shelves at a supermarket. So I guess he kind of let me know that that was a possibility, although he wasn't that it wasn't something that he stressed very much, which is kind of surprising considering I was sort of funny and creative, and he was sort of funny and creative, but he never really drew the line between me being funny and creative and him being funny and creative, which is all just sort of part of the general zeitgeist at my house of like not a lot of pep talks and things like that. But I guess I would watch comedians on TV and see them on Carson show and stuff like that, and I did have these little inklings like, wow, wouldn't that be a trip, like doing up there telling jokes, holding a microphone. I had a couple of those fleeting thoughts.
Around what age was that? What do you think?
God, I was probably listening to Dr. Demento radio playing, Weird Al songs when I was, 10, 11, 12, and
Uh-huh.
always liking kind of jokes and pranks and funny songs, like songs. You think of your Weird Al type songs and stuff
Uh-huh.
like that. At some point, I must have been 11 or 12. I probably got a George Carlin album. Maybe I had two George Carlin albums, then I would listen to those.
At
I
12.
wasn't yeah, I was living at my mom's house. I was young. I could have been 12 or 13, but I was young, and so there was some attraction to it, even though I didn't really know what it was.
Did you have it in your head at that young age that this was a possible career for you in the future, or you just did you just enjoy it? What did you think?
I really just enjoyed it. I didn't have it as a possible career. I listened to talk radio and morning radio, and it was always sort of a fantasy, like, oh man, imagine that, a job where you talk. You know what I mean? That seemed like a dream job to me. But
You were listening to talk.
no,
Adam, sorry to interrupt. You were listening to talk radio at age 12, you think?
um, I say talk radio, and I hesitated a little because I wanted to be clear. I wasn't listening to like Rush Limbaugh political talk or whatever. I would listen to morning, the morning drive time guy,
Sure.
talking fast and telling the jokes with the sound effects and that kind of stuff. And I wasn't 8, I was probably 11, but I I I remember hearing the jingles and kind of like repeating the jingles and that kind of stuff and being kind of attracted to it.
Who were some of the people that you were listening to early on the radio?
Well,
You said Dr. Demento, and
Yeah, it would have been Dr. Demento, like Sunday nights. Um, Before, I'm trying to think, like when I was really young. I think there was a guy named Johnny Hall or something like that who was on out here. There was later on it became your sort of Mark and Brian's and Fraser Smith and these kinds of morning radio guys. But that was more, 14, 15, 16. And then after that, it became like talk radio, like interviews and psychologists and doctors, with their own sort of like afternoon talk shows and stuff like that. But I was always very attracted to talk radio.
Yeah. When do you think that the first inkling came to you that maybe it's something that you could do one day? Radio.
Yeah. So for me, and I may be a little different than most in this process, I knew I could do it at a fairly young age. I knew I was capable of doing it. I knew in high school or just after high school, just out of high school, I definitely knew that I could do that. I did not, however, think I was ever going to get the opportunity to do it. So it's a little bit of a twist on, I didn't believe in myself or whatever. I kind of did believe in myself.
Yeah.
I just didn't think I was ever going to see the inside of a radio studio.
Well, that's what I want to talk to you about next. You finally did get into radio and show business, I guess, at around the age of 30. So from the time you finished high school until around age 30, you mostly did manual labor, you did construction, you taught boxing. What made you think that you could make it in show business, even if you found a way to get your foot in the door, especially in LA, where so many people are trying and failing constantly to make it in show business? Where did that confidence come from that you could actually do it? Make it, I should say.
I didn't I didn't have thoughts about making it in show business. I had thoughts about trying to get into show business, but I really didn't have make it thoughts. I never had make it thoughts. I had thoughts that maybe if I met somebody, maybe they would let me in to the radio station. Maybe I could contribute in some way to someone else's show. But I never had real concrete thoughts about I'm going to make it in show business. I've never entertained those thoughts.
Um, well, you started out in radio. Was it K-Rock, right? With Mark and or sorry, Kevin and
Kevin
Bean.
and Bean.
So one of your inspirations early on in your radio and TV career was undoubtedly Jimmy Kimmel. You started on the radio with him at Kevin and Bean and moved on to create several other projects together. People today might think of Jimmy as a guy in a tuxedo kind of hosting all these award shows. But what do you think you learned early on from Jimmy in those early days in radio?
I learned from Jimmy that it was a job. It wasn't, you couldn't be a sort of flighty artist. This was not, you weren't Sacha Baron Cohen. This is a real job. You had to show up every day. You had to get to the station at 5 a.m. If you had work to do or bit to cut or splice, you had to get there at 4 a.m. There was business during the show. It was 4 hours of entertainment we had to put together. There wasn't any, wearing a beret and staring at a skull and trying to get inspiration. It was like, now there's no writer's block. This is a machine and it moves and you're part of it and you don't want your part to fail. And it is much more mechanical and had a feel to it like we were doing a drill on a submarine more than sitting around spitballing, funny creative ideas.
Yeah, it wasn't fun and games. It was hard work.
It was hard work, and it was really about being consistent, showing up every day, not having, not having, you just couldn't have one of those days where it's like, sorry, I'm just not feeling it today, man. There wasn't any of that. It was comedy, but it was sort of comedy in a factory setting.
Uh-huh.
And you wanted to be as funny and you wanted to be as creative as you could possibly be, but you had to churn out 4 hours of that a day. So it wasn't going to be that sort of life of an artist, plus the fact you weren't some smoky club, exploring ideas at 11 at night. It was, you're in Burbank, California, it's 5:15 in the morning and it was time to get to work.
Yeah, it's a tough time for comedy, I think, right?
Yes.
Adam, you finished high school. I think you went to a little bit of community college without ever really learning how to read properly. You've said
hmm
before that you didn't have a learning disability like dyslexia or anything like that. How did you make it so far into life without learning how to read? And how did that impact your life?
Um, I I went to a kind of weird hippie free range school from like 0 to 5th grade. I never learned anything about reading or writing or sounding out anything, or I didn't know a noun or verb. I didn't know anything. Once I got into the system, I just kind of bluffed my way through the system, and no one ever really found out. And how it shaped me is I never read a book. And so I never read anyone else's ideas. I didn't ingest other people's ideas. I made my own ideas. My thing was like I have to have my own ideas. And everything was verbal. So I couldn't write scripts or memorize scripts or, read cue cards or whatever. So it all had to be kind of in beat form. Everything for me was like, here's an idea, here's another idea, here's another idea, and then you have to improv everything. So I guess, you hear these people and they say, oh, when I was in high school, I loved to read. I would get my book and I would go outside, I would sit under a tree and I'd spend hours there reading. So I couldn't do that. So I talked everyone's ear off all the time. That's what I did. So I just got very verbal.
So Adam, you kind of got into radio, like I said earlier, at around the age of 30. So for, I don't know, 12 years or something after you finished high school, maybe 13 years, you were just kind of drifting aimlessly, doing manual labor. I think you did some time at the Groundlings. Do you think that inability to read and write properly slowed your career path? You could have advanced faster if maybe you could have been able to read and write properly. Do you think so?
Well, I do in that there wasn't all the spell checks and the, computers, and there wasn't any of that stuff, right? So for me, I had to take a lot of potential jobs off the table.
Mhm.
So a person like me back then, m- realistically should have been thinking, how could I get on? Um, how could I write for a sitcom, or how could I write for a morning show, or how can I get into the writers' room? Obviously, every show has, a late night show has one host and 16 writers,
Mhm.
and the Daily Show has one host and 17 writers. So obviously, being a writer is just a higher percentage gig. I don't know, good luck. Johnny Carson was on TV for 50 years, and then Jay Leno was on for 50 years. It's like you're not going to get that job, but but a writer, but I couldn't write. I couldn't physically, I couldn't hand anyone anything,
Yeah.
so much less a resume. So it definitely hampered potential career paths. I knew later on in my career, although not my career, but later on, I was, 26, 27, 28. I would hear about guys that I knew getting writing gigs on an animated series or a writing gig on a sitcom. And I knew in almost every case I was funnier than they were, but I couldn't write. So it definitely hampered that.
It must have been very frustrating for you to know that you had that potential, but you were kind of stuck because of your inability to read and write.
Sadly, it wasn't that frustrating. It, I don't know why it wasn't that frustrating. I took it as, like a short guy who can't play in the NBA. It's like you just can't, you don't write. The job is called a writer, a comedic writer, television writer, sitcom writer. It's got the word writer in it, and you can't type or spell. So it it should have been frustrating, but it really wasn't. I just sort of went, well,
You just
that's something
accepted
you're
it.
not going to do. Right.
Okay. Well, you can read and write now, so you kind of figured it out, I guess, at some point along the way. In fact,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I did. I had to learn to write and read out loud and do all that stuff along the way incrementally as my career progressed. So yes, I did. I can't sit down and type out pages to this day, but I figured out ways to work it out.
I remember you said before maybe that early on in your radio career, had to read copy, and it was the most terrifying part of the job. You weren't afraid of being funny, but you were afraid of having to read a sponsor ad or something like that. Is that correct?
Sure, yeah, reading out loud was a major issue for me, practically and psychologically. And reading into a microphone just literally just amplified that fear.
Of course, of course. Okay, well let's move on. You have written, created, directed, and starred in a wide variety of television shows and even feature films. But then you moved into documentary films, beginning, I think, with winning The Racing Life of Paul Newman. To me, that seems like a different animal than TV shows and feature films, perhaps with a whole new set of challenges. Is there a particular documentary film that you can point to that may have inspired you to move in that direction?
I always enjoyed documentaries, sort of like I always enjoyed talk radio. I didn't really care about the subject. I just wanted the execution of it. Um, there's many great documentaries, and I was a fan of many of them. And there's your hoop dreams and all this stuff like on History Channel and all that kind of stuff. And I I don't think there was one. It was just I like I like storytelling, and this is the and I was not a fan of a kind of a sitcom approach to life, and I wasn't really a fan of a sort of novel approach to life. I like my stories to have had happen, to be real, and I wanted to tell stories, either they were about myself or tell a story about Paul Newman and his racing life, or whatever other docs we've made. It didn't seem it making up stuff. And that's why, like I said, sitcom stuff like it always kind of felt like empty calories to me. And so I would have never wanted to read a story about a spy novel, but I certainly would watch a documentary about a real spy. And that's, I guess that's what kind of led me down that road.
Makes sense. Adam, I want to go back a little bit and talk about football. Football played a huge role in your life and in shaping who you are to a large degree, I think. You played football from a young age all the way through high school, where you were eventually the captain of the team. When high school ended, so did football. How rough was it to have that constant and singular positive force in your life just suddenly gone?
It was brutal for me. I really went through almost like I had to rehab off of football.
Mm,
It was my only identity,
yeah.
and the only thing I was kind of known for, and really the only thing I was good at or had any skill in. So it was a very long period of time after I got out of high school that I kind of flushed the football out of my system. I would have dreams about it constantly.
Did you ever think that you could move on to like the collegiate level?
Um, Yeah, I mean, I was recruited by some colleges and universities. Nothing, not big football powerhouses. Just UC Davis and Cal Poly Pomona and Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and Marshall, I guess, is a decent sized
That's
school
quite a
that
few
recruited
schools.
me.
Why didn't it pan out for you?
Yeah, there were quite a few schools, small schools mainly, not big football schools, but there were probably 7 or 8 contenders in there. Well, as I'd mentioned, I didn't really have a dialogue with my family. We didn't really talk about things. I was a bad student. I didn't really know how it was going to work. I mean, who would fill out the paperwork? How would I move to one of these places? How would I move to UC Davis? How would I get an apartment or housing? Who would pay for books? How would I physically get from North Hollywood to up north to UC Davis or Willamette, in Portland? I mean, that's how I thought. Like, how would one even get to Portland, Oregon, from where I was? I didn't have a credit card or know anybody at an airline. Like, I didn't even know where these places were. Most of the schools that recruited me, I didn't even know where they were, and I couldn't imagine all that would have gone into, again, paperwork and dormitories and books. Who would pay for that? Or I know I'd be getting a scholarship, but like, who? I don't know. Did they pay for housing? Did they pay for books? It was seemed impossible.
Did you ever have a discussion about that with your family?
I don't think they know, and I do not know if they know I don't know what they know about me being recruited to play football.
Adam, that seems insane. You had the
It does.
potential. You were recruited by what, 4 or 5 universities to continue playing football, which was your only passion in life, really, at that point. Why was there no discussion? Can you describe that dynamic?
I was recruited by 7 or 8 places,
Wow.
and um, at that point, I didn't live with my mom.
Hmm.
I lived with my dad, my stepmom. They weren't really fans, and I remember a time or two getting a newspaper. I would get the school UC Davis would send me their school newspaper. I don't know why that was supposed to be attractive, but it was just how they did it. And I remember a time or two leaving a recruitment letter out, like in the kitchen, sort of seeing if someone would notice it or comment on it or take it aside and read it or something of that nature. But they never did. And and I never went to them because I was pretty shut down by then. But I knew instinctively they could do nothing, or sorry, they would do nothing. I didn't have any sense that they would do anything, or I know if I talked to my dad about it, he wouldn't have said, "Okay, what's the name of the head coach? Let me get him on the phone." Like, they would have never done that. They would have kind of listened and said something like "good luck" or something, and so I just never brought it up.
Adam, that to most people that sounds crazy. Why do you think that was? Why do you think that you had that kind of relation? I wasn't planning to ask you about this, but I must. Why do you think that you had that kind of dynamic in your home? Was it because of your mother? Was it because of your father? Was it just all of you together? That's how it worked out. And it must have been crushing for you to have a family that was just so disinterested in you and your well-being.
Yeah, I'm sure it was, but by that time, I'd figured this stuff out when I was 12, So by the time I was 17 and a half, it was like, well, you know what you got. I mean, you're living in the middle of it. So I had sort of made my peace with who they were, or more precisely, who they weren't,
Uh,
and did not expect anything from them.
That's terrible to hear that. Well, let's talk about something a little bit more positive. Adam. When going over your career highlights, I forgot to mention Dancer, a great passion of yours, of course.
Mhm.
You were on Dancing with the Stars several years ago, and I think you would agree that you don't seem like someone that would have agreed to do that kind of show. In fact, I think your agent, James Dixon, tried to persuade you not to do it, but you did it. Why did you agree to do it, and what did you gain from your experience?
I did it because it scared me. And once I realized I was scared, I could say I don't want to do it because it's lame. But the real reason would have been I don't want to do it because I'm scared. And so once I realized I was scared, then I
Scared,
realized
scared of what?
I had humiliating myself. I'm not a good dancer.
Mhm.
You know, it's a time commitment, and you're dancing in front of 20 million people. I can't dance, so that was something that I considered in terms of being fearful, being judged. You know, making an
Literally.
ass to yourself, and literally. And once I realized if I said no, it would be because of the fear more than it would be because I didn't want to do the show or I didn't have time to do the show or whatever that was. So once I realized it was the fear, I then realized I had to do it.
And when you were doing it, do you remember the first time that you stepped out on the dance floor for your first routine? It must have been utterly terrifying.
It was utterly terrifying, and I do remember that. And I thought to myself, I'm going to use this. Like I'm gonna process this, and I will use it to my advantage in other endeavors that I might be better at naturally.
Well, that's what I want to. That's what I want to know. What did you get specifically from that experience? You kind of leaned into your fear and you faced it. So after it was said and done, what did you walk away with after that experience was done?
I knew that well, anytime you lean into your fear, you're going to walk away with something good, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So it was, it was all it was, sorry for being vague, but it was all the good stuff you get from leaning into your fear. That's what I got. Whatever your fear is, leaning into it, you just walk away with a whole bunch of good stuff. And that's what I walked away with.
Well, something else that you did in your career that was probably a bit scary for you was taking over for Howard Stern. I want to know, was that a pretty scary experience for you as well? You obviously had a lot of years of experience on radio, but that was a different game entirely. I listened in those early days, and while I love the show, I could actually hear in your voice from time to time, maybe when you were talking to a well-known celebrity or something, you did sound a bit nervous to me, which surprised me because I've been listening to you for a while. So how was that experience for you? Was it scary?
No, I didn't experience fear in that particular endeavor.
Mm,
I felt confident. I'd been on Stern's show a lot.
uh-huh.
I felt like this was a strength of mine versus dancing with the stars. It was a tough, it was a hard experience, but there was no, it was not a fearful experience.
Okay. Um, Listening to that show, I heard you on Loveline. I watched you on Loveline. Man Show, I was a fan. But I kind of lost touch and I got back on you. I think it was the second year of the radio show that you were doing. And I tuned in and I heard Danny Bonaducci and I was confused. Um, I listened to your show from then on. But what was that dynamic like working with Danny Bonaducci? Because I know you like the guy, but it seemed like you were totally at odds working together. It must have been a difficult time for you, do you think?
Yeah, it was. We weren't a good partnership, and that was just one of those dumb radio things. And you know that's why radio's in the shape it's in today, terrestrial radio. So a lot of idiots making bad decisions, and that was just another in their pantheon of bad decisions. So um but it just made it a little more challenging for me, and I just figure this is where you're at for a year. So you gotta dance with who brung you or whoever you brung.
Fair enough. It was compelling. It was interesting, confusing at first, but it made the show had a weird dynamic. It was a bit interesting to me to listen to. Okay, I got a couple more questions for you, Adam. Adam, I've listened to you a lot, but I'm not sure I've heard you discuss your management style. It sounds like kind of corporate speak, but you are in fact a manager. You have lots of different projects that you're working on. You have a team of people that you oversee. Um, and you're quite successful in many different areas. So you must in fact be a good manager. How would you describe your leadership style or your management style?
I don't have a lot of management style. I just sort of tell people what I want to do and explain it to them in as straightforward a way as I can, and and correct them along the way, and try not to be douchey along the way, and that's about it. I just have, here's your job, here's what I want, here's what I need. That's about it. I don't really have a style.
Interesting. Finally, Adam, on a serious note, I'm sure you've heard the recent news about the New Yorker and CNN's legal analyst, Jeffrey Toobin. He accidentally beat off while in a Zoom meeting. It's been referred to as Zoom Dick, but you founded the practice of Speng Shui long ago. So in the era of COVID-19 and Zoom calls, what can you teach us all about Speng Shui in the modern era?
Well, the first tenet of Speng Shui is you never turn your back and the face of the computer screen to your office door. So anyone who walks into your office must not see what you're seeing on the screen before you see them. So that's first tenet of when I lay a room out for Speng Shui, I'll burn a little sage. I'll put on a little patchouli, and the first thing I do is I start figuring out the energy of the door and the energy of the room, and it's always the energy of either your wife or kids coming through the door. And so we first thing of Speng Shui is how to position the computer.
Of course. Um, Adam, I've been listening to you for around 20 years. I've laughed my ass off so many times, but I've also learned a lot from you. Adam, thank you for what you do, and thank you for joining me today on Meet My Inspiration.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks so much to Adam for such a great talk. He never fails to entertain and enlighten. To keep up with Adam and his many endeavors, check out adamcarolla.com for his latest podcast episodes and tour dates. His latest book, I'm Your Emotional Support Animal, is available on Amazon. And don't miss one of his latest films, No Safe Spaces, focusing on how free speech is under attack in America today at nosafespaces.com. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Meet My Inspiration, and I hope we've been able to inspire you too, even if just a little. Sometimes that's all it takes to make great things happen. Using the internet without ExpressVPN is like broadcasting to the world everything you do online. Here's how to protect yourself and get 3 months for free. Did you know that your internet service provider knows every single website you visit? And what's worse is they can sell this information to ad companies and tech giants who will use your data to target you. ExpressVPN creates a secure encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet so that your online activity can't be seen by anyone. ExpressVPN works on all devices, phones, laptops, even routers, so that everyone who shares your Wi-Fi is protected too. And the best part is using ExpressVPN is super easy. Just fire up the app, click one button, and you're protected. ExpressVPN is the world's #1 rated VPN by TechRadar, Wired, The Verge, and countless others. So if you believe your online activity is your business, secure yourself by visiting expressvpn.com/MMI, and you can get an extra 3 months for free. That's expressvpn.com/MMI.